A lot of the time, MMA fans will notice that athletes who look stereotypically athletic by the standards of other sports aren't necessarily as successful as they would expect in MMA. Kevin Randleman is one example of a guy who looks like he would make a great power athlete, but doesn't necessarily have the best MMA record. If you contrast his jumping abilities with Alexander Volkanovski, who until recently was ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world.
Your forehead like that, that went like that. Did you get that? That's record.
His standing vertical jump tests at about 44 centimeters or 17 inches. If you compare that in the NBA, the standard average vertical jump is around 28 to 30 inches, depending on which year you go by. If you look around at other sports, average vertical jumps tend to be slightly higher in the NFL and a bit lower in soccer. Some people will take this as evidence that there are lower level athletes competing at the highest level of MMA. I don't believe this is the case. If you look at the numbers put out by the UFC Performance Institute, who test counter movement jump, which is basically a vertical jump without the benefit of an arm swing, you can see that Volkanovski's vertical jump is under average for both the UFC and in comparison to athletes from other sports. So you can see that testing a vertical jump and using it as a predictor of success isn't all that. Whilst it is roughly a good predictor of the leg's ability to produce force and their ability to produce force quickly, it is not completely independent of technique. Sports scientists and strength and conditioning coaches are able to observe that inexperienced jumpers can, you could say, snatch at the jump. That is to say, if you imagine closing a door, you could try to slam the door by taking a meaty push, or you could punch the door and try to slam it that way. The advantage of pushing the door is you are able to produce much more force over time. If you look at an event as technical as the high jump, there may be as much as 10 inches in variation in ability in a standing jump for athletes who will finish within 1 centimeter of each other in an event such as the Olympic Games. Part of the reason for this is because some athletes will perform with better jump mechanics on the day, whilst others will excel more in high velocity force production. So getting this video back to the original point, which was why slow twitch muscles may be an advantage in MMA. Most people will have the vague understanding that fast twitch muscles are an advantage in an event such as a sprint, whereas slow twitch muscles are more beneficial in an event such as a marathon. Whilst this is true, what you also have to understand is that to personify, fast twitch muscles like moving fast and slow twitch muscles like moving slowly. By saying fast twitch muscles like moving quickly, the easiest way to externalize this is to look at the speed of the limb movements. So some of the fastest limb movements would be things like sprinting or a boxer throwing a combination. In contrast, a slow limb movement would be something like holding the horse stance. In fact, holding the position involves no movement, though the muscles still need to work. So in the context of an athlete recovering in between very fast sprints, the slow twitch muscles are going to still be more efficient, but not by as much as in an event with slower movements such as a marathon. In the context of a grinding wrestling exchange, the fast twitch muscle fibres are going to burn out fast. The other factor in determining the optimal combination of fibre types is the duration of the event. At 25 minutes, an MMA bout isn't as long as a soccer match or basketball game. However, obviously the action is very continuous, so there's no real way to fade into the background and regroup a bit the way there is in a soccer match. So to look at a bit of substantiation for what I've been saying, you can find a link to the studies shown on screen in the description. The key point I'm going to focus on here is to highlight, quote, the relationship of fast twitch proportion to Wilks coefficient in powerlifters, end quote. Wilks coefficient is a formula that is used to rank powerlifters, basically by comparing how big their lifts are in comparison to their size. I think the misconception is that because powerlifting involves very big efforts, Having a large proportion of fast-twitch muscles will be a strong predictor of success. However, if what I've been saying is true, that fast-twitch muscle fibres are only beneficial in sports with faster movement speeds, then you'd expect there to be little or no relationship between powerlifting performance and how many of your muscle fibres are fast twitch versus slow twitch. You can see some examples of elite weightlifting performance on screen. In the context of the snatch, parts of the technique involve a very fast bar speed, whereas in the squat, the bar speed is very slow. So as some of you may know, the way scientists assess muscle fiber type is by looking at the myosin heavy chain on the muscle fiber. There is myosin heavy chain type 1, which is found in slow twitch muscle fibers. Then there is type 2A, which is found in fairly fast muscles. And then there is type 2X, which is found in very fast twitch muscle fibers. So looking at the graph from the study I've mentioned earlier, on the left hand side you have Wilks coefficient, which is rating powerlifters in ascending order. On the bottom panel you have MHC2A, which is assessing the proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers. You are free to pause this to fully take the graph in. You can see that the top dot on the graph, which indicates the best pound for pound powerlifter, had a roughly average proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers and a similar proportion to the least successful powerlifter. The final quote, which I'm going to single out from this paper, is displayed on screen. Quote, "Weightlifting has a high event-specific demand for muscular power, i.e. high velocity movements, whereas typical powerlifting style training primarily enacts high force, low velocity skeletal muscle contractions." End quote. I'm not sure as to the history of Olympic style weightlifting, but for whatever reason, the technique that is popular uses a much faster bar speed than powerlifting. In a weightlifting technique such as the snatch, the slow twitch muscle fibers might not contract fast enough to contribute to force production. To bring this video back onto the topic of MMA and to look at certain common movements on a case-by-case basis. In general, when punching, an athlete with a higher proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers is going to probably be better off. More fast twitch fibers will enable the athlete to punch faster. They will also be able to punch harder, as the slow twitch fibers may not contract fast enough to contribute to force production. And although the fast twitch muscle fibers may burn out faster, they are essentially in their element moving faster, so the difference in endurance between fast and slow twitch fibers will not be as significant. When looking at other movements such as a butterfly guard sweep or a throw of some sort, the advantage of fast twitch fibers are probably not as clear. In this context, the opponent's body weight has to be overcome, which creates a delay which allows the slow twitch muscle fibers more time to contribute to force production. If you ignore the factor of skill, you would still probably be better off with more fast twitch muscle fibers if the matches lasted a minute. But when you factor in endurance, it becomes debatable. When you are talking about applying a blood or air choke, generally you are talking about holding a static position for several seconds with very little change in muscle length. In this context, the technique of creating the pressure to cut off the blood or air supply and the magnitude of the force the muscles can produce are much more important than producing force quickly or quickly accelerating to maximum force production. So overall, I'm not saying that slow twitch muscle fibers are necessarily a prized asset, or that an athlete should conceive a strategy to optimize having as many fast twitch muscle fibers as possible. However, equally there are people who wonder if MMA is the right sport for them. If the rationale is they don't have enough fast twitch muscle fibers, then I would question this. Also, when you look at various strength and conditioning strategies, there is aerobic exercise which is used by the Diaz brothers, for instance, in the form of triathlon training. A downside of this training method is that it can minimize an athlete's explosive characteristics by driving conversion of fast twitch muscles into slow twitch muscles. This is a concern in football and basketball, and whilst it is a concern in MMA, as I've explained, I don't think it's quite as big of a concern. Other popular strength and conditioning methods apply metrics which seeks to develop the elastic tissue in the tendons and connective tissue. Then there is power training, which helps the muscles to move fast and produce force quickly. Then there is weight training, which raises the maximum force the muscles are capable of producing regardless of time. With these factors in mind, weight training could be a more MMA specific focus of a strength and conditioning program, whereas general power training outside of working on the pads or heavy bag might not be the best use of time. So overall, the evidence for me suggests that muscle fiber type is not that important for success in MMA. If you disregard skill, fast-twitch muscles provide short-term benefits in striking and some grappling moves, whereas slow-twitch muscles have better endurance and provide very similar power in other grappling moves.